The galaxy had always known the Zarkal as fighters, and not the polite kind who spar over tea. No, the Zarkal were the kind of species who negotiated with their fists and let their warships do the talking. Their homeworld, Thrazul, was a barren, volcanic hellscape, perfect for building a race of conquerors who thrived on conflict. If there was a war going on anywhere in the galaxy, the Zarkal had already arrived, made a name for themselves, and probably left behind a few broken moons in the process. And then came humanity. The humans had been an unexpected addition to the galactic stage. The Zarkal had considered them a minor nuisance, infants in the grand cosmic war machine. But, as often happens in the galaxy, the underdog did what they did best. They survived. And not just survived. No, humanity didn't just show up for the show. They changed the game. The first sign of trouble had been on a diplomatic mission, a disaster by galactic standards. Humans, who had recently joined the Interstellar Council, were sent to negotiate a peace treaty with the Zarkal. The Zarkal's queen, Shulraxa, who had never been known for her sense of humor, unless you counted the way she tore planets apart as a fun activity, was ready to crush any idea of peace with her signature-style war. The mission was led by General Bradley Duke Carson, an Earthborn negotiator with a particular knack for diplomacy, who had no formal education in intergalactic law, but a lot of experience in bar brawls. It was supposed to be a simple sit-down. The diplomats would meet in a conference room, present their terms, shake hands, and leave. Instead, it went something like this. The human delegation, consisting of General Duke Carson, his translator Sparky, a very sarcastic AI embedded in his helmet, and a few nervous officials, arrived at the Zarkal's flagship, the Ravager of Worlds. Duke, wearing his military uniform, a half-untucked shirt, and a pair of boots that had seen better days, stepped into the grand hall of the Zarkal. The walls were lined with blood-red banners and trophies of defeated enemies. Mostly skulls, but a few broken starships. Phew, Duke whispered to Sparky. This place smells like trouble. I'm sure the Zarkal would be delighted to hear that, General, Sparky replied dryly. Also, I believe you just insulted the entire room. Everyone's staring at you. Duke grinned. Perfect. I love making an entrance. Before them stood Queen Shulraxa, the fearsome leader of the Zarkal. She was a towering figure, 12 feet tall, with crimson scales, for muscular arms, and a crown made from the remains of a defeated Frogax warship. She could breathe fire. She had once vaporized a planet just because she didn't like its colors. And yet, she stared down at Duke with an odd mixture of amusement and curiosity. Human, Shulraxa growled. You come to us seeking peace? A species so young, you barely even know how to destroy a moon. Duke, undeterred, stood up straighter. Well, we're a little rusty on the moon destruction front, Your Majesty, but I'm sure we can work something out. He winked. The Zarkal guards surrounding the room tensed. They were baffled. Humans were supposed to be weak, fragile. Yet, here was one of them, casually chatting with their queen as if he were ordering a drink at a bar. Are you mocking me? Queen Shulraxa asked, narrowing her glowing eyes. No, Duke said, shaking his head. I'm just illustrating how we've been trying to change our approach to things, you know? Instead of blowing things up at the first sign of trouble, we're trying something new. Like talking, Shulraxa snorted. You expect me to believe that humans want peace? Your entire history is one of war and conflict. Earth is nothing but a smoldering pile of rubble and wars over who gets the last donut. Well, you got me there, Duke said with a grin. But here's the thing, Queenie, we're learning. We're evolving. War isn't always the answer. Sometimes the solution is donuts. He paused. Wait, no, I didn't mean that. Shulraxa's eyes narrowed even further. You dare mention food at a peace negotiation? Duke immediately stepped forward, raising his hands in mock surrender. All right. Bad analogy. What I meant was humans were not about mindless destruction anymore. Sure, we've got a bit of a violent streak, but hey, so do you guys. So maybe we meet in the middle? Shulraxa blinked in surprise, clearly thrown off by the unexpected turn of events. The Zarkal had no concept of meeting in the middle. The idea of compromising was foreign to her. At that moment, Sparky, who had been quietly observing the entire exchange, piped up through Duke's helmet. You've got two options, General. Either you convince her or you get vaporized. No pressure. Duke ignored the AI. What I'm saying is, he continued, leaning in slightly, humans get that sometimes it's better to talk things through. We've been at the bottom of the food chain, you know? We've fought for everything we've got. So, when we say we want peace, it's because we know how ugly war can get. Shulraxa tilted her head, clearly intrigued despite herself. You speak with conviction, human. Well, I'm also a bit of a gambler, Duke said with a grin. And I'm betting that if we work together, you and I can build something better than just constant fighting. I know your people, they thrive on victory, right? How about we make that victory something that lasts? The Queen stared down at him, considering. There was a pause, a long, pregnant silence, before she finally let out a deep, guttural laugh. Humans, always so unpredictable. You are not what I expected. You know, Duke said, lowering his voice, we've got a saying back home. It goes, if you want to make peace with a grizzly bear, you gotta offer it a donut. The Zarkal Queen blinked again, this time looking genuinely confused. A donut? Duke grinned widely. Donuts are the universal peace offering on Earth. Just trust me on this one. Shulraxa stared at him for a moment, then burst into laughter. It was loud, booming, and, dare I say, terrifying, but it wasn't a laugh of anger or contempt. It was the kind of laughter one might expect from someone who had just realized they were getting the better end of a deal. Very well, human, she said finally, wiping a tear from her eye. You will have your peace, but only because you amuse me, and that's how humanity, a species barely out of its infancy in galactic terms, brokered the first ever peace treaty with the Zarkal. Not with weapons, not with threats, but with the most unlikely of things, a joke about donuts. The peace treaty was signed a week later, and the galaxy's expectations were immediately flipped upside down. A species known for reducing entire star systems to rubble, suddenly agreeing to terms of peace, and the negotiations were led by a human. The Zarkal Empire's diplomatic offices were flooded with messages from every corner of the galaxy. The Yxroth Coalition, the Nagalore Dominion, and even the aquatic Hydran tribes, who communicated entirely through subsonic pulses, had all sent congratulatory notes. Some were polite, others were somewhat sarcastic, but it didn't matter. The humans had done the impossible. The galactic ambassadors were in shock. It's the humans, right? One ambassador from the Tsulrath said. They don't even have a working space elevator, and now they're in peace talks with Shulraxa? You know, the one who destroyed a moon for sport. Yeah, they've got this whole charm offensive thing down, replied the representative from the Lithari Union, who had long given up on peace and was simply there for the popcorn. Meanwhile, back on Thrazul, General Duke Carson was having a slightly more interesting time. I can't believe this is working, Duke muttered to himself as he wandered through the Zarkal Palace. He had been invited, as part of the peace agreement, to stay for a traditional Zarkal feast. Of course, the last human who had been invited to a Zarkal feast had been turned into fossils by the end of it, but Duke wasn't worried. He'd seen worse at family barbecues. And there was also the fact that he had recently single-handedly disarmed a Zarkal warlord with nothing more than a sock full of quarters. Beside him, Sparky buzzed in his helmet. General, are you sure about this? The last time you were at a Zarkal feast, they tried to eat you, alive. Relax, Sparky, Duke said, waving off the concern. This time it's official. Plus, they've signed the peace treaty. How bad could it get? I don't know, General, Sparky replied with a tone that could only be described as vaguely sarcastic. Have you seen the Zarkal mood lighting? It's a dim red with just a hint of savagery. As they entered the massive dining hall, Duke was greeted by the sight of Shulraxa herself, sitting on a throne made entirely of shattered space cruisers, her 4 muscular arms folded in an expression that could have been either respect or annoyance. She had her eyes locked on Duke. Ah, the human arrives, she said in her deep, rumbling voice, her lips curling slightly. I trust you are ready to experience Zarkal cuisine? Duke tried to smile with as much bravado as possible, though there was a noticeable bead of sweat on his forehead. Absolutely. I'm ready for anything. He turned to the table, which was covered in strange, pulsating things. Some looked like they were still moving. Others appeared to be glowing. And there was one dish that seemed to scream when you touched it. Just so you know, Duke continued, raising his hands in mock surrender, I have a slight food allergy. If I fall over and start spasming, it's probably the well. Everything on the menu. Shulrax's gaze was unreadable. Oh, don't worry. Our meals are designed to thrill the senses, human. You may find yourself changed by the experience. Oh, yeah. Sure. Totally thrilled, Duke said, eyeing a glowing, tentacled blob that was inching its way toward his plate. He hesitated, then grinned at Shulraxa. So, when's dessert? I'm a big fan of cake. Cake? The queen's voice echoed around the hall. She didn't laugh, but her 3 eyes blinked in apparent confusion. We do not have cake. Well, that's a shame, Duke said, completely deadpan. I thought all galactic peace deals came with cake. I mean, who would sign a peace treaty without cake? The entire hall fell silent. Cake is sacred, Shulraxa said, her tone dropping to a dangerous level. Do not mock the Zarkal's sacred offerings, human. We do not negotiate with cake. Duke, sensing the room growing tense, quickly adjusted. No, not mocking. I'm just saying cake is a universal peace symbol. You know, in human culture, cake represents celebration and unity. I thought we could, expand our horizons a bit. The Zarkal stared at him. The pulse of tension in the room was palpable. One of the Zarkal guards let out a low growl, and Duke instinctively reached for his helmet to calm Sparky's nerves. The last thing he wanted was for the entire Zarkal Empire to declare war again over dessert preferences. But then, to his surprise, Queen Shulraxa leaned forward in her throne and, without warning, broke into a loud, unsettling laugh. It echoed across the hall, shaking the glass in the walls. Cake, you are a strange one, human, she said, wiping a tear from her eye. Fine. If you truly believe in this cake, we will consider it. Duke blinked. Wait, you're serious? We can have cake? The queen raised a finger. You will have cake. But only if you prove that you can earn it. She gestured to the giant Zarkal feast laid before them. First, you must partake in our food. Show us your resolve. Duke swallowed hard. Okay, this is where I die. But he was a human, and death was just a minor inconvenience at this point. Half an hour later, Duke found himself covered in goo, but still alive. He had successfully consumed what could only be described as the most aggressive alien cuisine in the galaxy. And while he had hoped to survive the experience, he was beginning to wonder if he might need a few more bills of health insurance from the galactic government after this. Shulraxa looked at him, her 4 eyes narrowing in a way that made Duke wonder if she just found a new species of human. One that could survive the impossible. Well done, human, she said, a rare tone of respect creeping into her voice. Perhaps we shall break bread over cake after all. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was how a single human, and his appetite for strange foods, managed to not only broker peace with the fiercest warriors in the galaxy but also secured the universal peace offering that would be known as the Intergalactic Cake Treaty. The news spread like wildfire through the galaxy. The Zarkal, notorious for their bloodthirsty conquests, had signed a peace treaty with the humans. The galaxy was still processing the fact that the Zarkal had cake in their diplomatic talks, cake of all things. For weeks, every major galactic network ran special features on the momentous occasion. The Zarkal queen, Shulraxa, had reportedly laughed at the very idea of a cake-based peace treaty, only to suddenly embrace it as a universal symbol of galactic unity. But what no one expected was that the humans didn't stop there. In fact, they had more surprises up their sleeves. Back on Earth, General Duke Carson and his diplomatic team were gearing up for their next mission. A grand tour of the galaxy, designed to showcase the new, peaceful Human-Zarkal alliance. And while Duke had become somewhat of a celebrity, the universe's idea of peace wasn't exactly what he'd anticipated. After all, humanity's idea of peace often involved avoiding an all-out bar brawl. But now, peace meant diplomatic galactic tours, strange customs, and, most bizarrely of all, trying to stop the Zarkal from declaring cake an official weapon of mass destruction. The first stop on their intergalactic tour was the YX Roth Coalition, a race of giant, four-armed, tree-like beings with bark for skin and eyes that shimmered like green jewels. Their homeworld, ZY lore, was a jungle planet filled with giant floating islands that seemed to defy gravity. But what truly made the Yxroth unique was their persistence. They were the worst at negotiating peace. For centuries, they had waged war over trivial things, like the placement of a single leaf on a ceremonial crown. So, naturally, they had invited the humans to negotiate their first-ever treaty with the Zarkal, thinking that if humans could somehow make peace with the Zarkal, surely they could do anything. And that's where General Duke Carson found himself once again standing before a vast, intimidating council of Yxroth leaders. They were massive beings, their limbs covered in intricate vine tattoos, each adorned in ceremonial robes made of living plant fibers. The air around them practically buzzed with energy, and Duke couldn't help but wonder if the plants on ZY lore were as aggressive as the people. Human, one of the Yxroth leaders, Drukun the Magnificent, boomed. "We have seen your success with the Zarkal. Your strange methods have intrigued us. Perhaps now, you will help us settle our most important conflict." Duke looked around the massive council chamber, which was adorned with what appeared to be swinging vines and floating rocks. He smiled nervously. "Oh sure. What's the issue? You guys have a big war brewing?" Drukun shook his massive head. "No, human. We have something much more pressing than war. Our greatest conflict is the color of the ceremonial crown." Duke blinked. "Wait, what?" The entire council of Yxroth leaders began muttering in unison, their voices rising like the wind through a forest. "It is a terrible problem," Drukun continued. "The leaves of our sacred trees are not the proper hue for the crown. The red leaves are too fiery, and the gold leaves are too showy. What shall we do, human?" Duke glanced around. "Wait a minute. You guys have been fighting over colors?" The Yxroth leaders nodded gravely, their 4 eyes locked on him with utter sincerity. "Yes, it is a matter of honor." Duke rubbed his temples. "Well, that's, complicated. Okay, what if we just compromise? Half red, half gold." Drukun's eyes widened. "Half red, half gold, you mean balance?" "Yes, balance," Duke said, growing a little more confident. "It's like a human thing. Yin and yang. Maybe you don't need the perfect shade of anything. Maybe it's about finding the right blend, the harmony." The Yxroth leaders exchanged confused glances. "Harmony," one whispered. "Balance," another mused. Duke took a deep breath. "Just trust me. Okay? The human way is about compromise. You don't need to destroy each other over a crown." For a moment, silence filled the chamber. The tension was thick enough to cut with a machete. Then Drukun raised his enormous, 4-armed hands to the air and bellowed, "He speaks the truth." The Yxroth leaders erupted into applause, causing several vines to shake violently. The floating rocks began to hover higher in the air, creating a stunning visual of Yxroth unity. Duke stared, wide-eyed. "Wait, you're actually going for this?" "We shall blend the leaves," Drukun roared, "and we shall end this petty war. For the first time in centuries, we will have a peaceful ceremony, and it shall be celebrated across the land." Duke nodded slowly, still processing what had just happened. "I think I need a drink after this." "Not until we name a new peace offering," said Drukun. "You shall choose. What do humans offer in times of peace?" "Oh no, not this again," Duke muttered under his breath. "You have brought cake to the Zarkal, yes? Then we too shall have cake," Drukun declared with a triumphant wave. "Oh, for the love of," Duke sighed. "Fine, cake it is." By the time Duke and his team left ZY lore, they were almost certain they were going to start a cake revolution across the galaxy. The Yxroth were all in, and the entire peace process was apparently going to be marked with a giant, planet-wide celebration revolving around cake. The diplomatic team couldn't help but laugh as they boarded their ship for the next leg of their tour. "I gotta say, Duke," Sparky chimed in from his helmet, "I thought this whole cake diplomacy thing was a one-off. But now we've got 2 species that literally cannot stop talking about cake." Duke wiped a bead of sweat from his brow. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up, Sparky. Soon, I'll be known as the Cake General." "You're already a legend," Sparky replied. It's just that cake is your new weapon of choice. Well, at least it's a sweet weapon, Duke muttered, as the ship blasted off, leaving behind another planet who would probably never look at a slice of cake the same way again. After their successful diplomatic tour, General Duke Carson and the human delegation became something of legends across the galaxy. Word had spread faster than a warp drive on full throttle. Humanity had done the impossible. Not only had they brokered peace with the Zarkal, the galaxy's most feared and war-hungry species, but they had brought cake and made it a symbol of universal diplomacy. The Zarkal, once the ultimate warmongers, now held peace summits over enormous, glittering cake platters. Their warships had been retrofitted with cake diplomacy zones, and every time they encountered another species, they would initiate negotiations by offering slices of cake. The Galactic Council even declared an official Day of Cake Peace, where all species would come together to share desserts in the name of universal harmony. The Yxroth, after their own treaty, had established a new tradition, a color-blending ceremony at every peace conference. The once violent war over the crown's colors was now an annual festival of unity, with red and gold leaf crowns worn proudly by every Yxroth leader, while cakes were served in every shape and size: lemon, chocolate, spice, and even cake-shaped plant matter for those who still liked a little wariness in their dessert. As for Duke, well, he had become a galactic hero, and not just for his ability to survive Zarkal feasts or make peace with bloodthirsty aliens. No, Duke was known far and wide as the Cake General, a title that would stick for the rest of his life. And strangely, he wasn't even mad about it. The reputation had its perks: free cake at every diplomatic meeting, and, more importantly, the certainty that no one in the galaxy would ever underestimate the human spirit again. A few months later, Duke stood on a stage at the Galactic Unity Summit, an event that was now almost entirely about peace, cake, and somehow diplomatic tastings of interstellar pastries. The audience was filled with representatives from every corner of the galaxy. A sea of colors, species, and different interpretations of what good taste meant. Duke adjusted his uniform, which had a massive patch of a cake on the shoulder, just in case anyone forgot who he was. As he took the podium, a wave of laughter rippled through the crowd. The Zarkal delegation sat at the front, their queen Shulraxa beaming with a pride only a culturally confused warlord could muster. Next to her was the head of the Yxroth coalition, Drukun the Magnificent, holding a giant rainbow-colored cake. He gestured dramatically to the confection, his bark-covered limbs extended like tree branches in a gale. "Let it be known, General Carson," Drukun boomed in his resonant voice, "that you have forever changed the galaxy. And to mark the occasion, I present to you this cake, a symbol of our endless gratitude for bringing balance and flavor to our worlds." Duke chuckled, shaking his head. "I always knew I'd be remembered for something big, but I figured it would be saving the galaxy, not serving it cake." The crowd erupted in cheers, and Shulraxa stood, raising her arms as though declaring victory over an entire war. Except now, it was a war for peace. "General Carson," she called, her voice as booming as ever. "We Zarkal have never known such peace, such sweetness. You have brought us what we never thought possible." Duke, overwhelmed, took a deep breath. All right, I've done my part, but I think we can all agree on one thing. Peace is sweeter than anything we could have imagined." The crowd erupted again, and Duke couldn't help but smile. Behind him, Sparky buzzed in his helmet. "Well, General," the AI said dryly, "you've managed to make the galaxy a better place one cake at a time." "Yep," Duke grinned. "And that's something even the Zarkal can get behind." And so, the galaxy, once on the brink of chaos, found its new form of diplomacy: cake. Humanity had not only survived its first steps onto the galactic stage, they had redefined it. As for Duke Carson, well, he went on to endure more cake-based peace treaties, diplomatic meetings with increasingly ridiculous confectionery displays, and a few planetary disputes over frosting, but none of it seemed nearly as absurd as the first time he sat down with Shulraxa, expecting an alien warlord and getting a cake-loving queen instead. He would later become a legend, not for his military genius, not for his tactics in battle, but for something far more powerful. He had done the impossible. He had convinced the galaxy to stop fighting, start laughing, and share cake.